The kitchen was always full of light, laughter, and the comforting sizzle of a pan. But lately, the silence in Rachael Ray's home has become deafening. For years, fans watched the queen of 30-minute meals build an empire with her husband, John Cusimano, by her side. They were the ultimate power couple, until the whispers started. Whispers of secret struggles, hidden health battles, and a marriage pushed to the absolute breaking point. Now, the cameras are off, and the truth is finally coming out. Rachael is stepping forward to reveal what was really happening behind the closed doors of their upstate New York home. It wasn't just about the recipe for a perfect life, it was about a desperate fight to keep her world from falling apart. What did she find in the quiet moments after the fame faded, and is it enough to save the man she loves? The world of Rachael Ray was always painted in the brightest colors. To the millions of people who tuned in every day, she was more than just a cook, she was a burst of energy, a friend in the kitchen, and a symbol of the American dream. Beside her stood John Cusimano, a soulful musician with a calm presence that seemed to perfectly balance Rachael's high-speed life. Their story began like a classic Hollywood romance, a chance meeting at a party that sparked a whirlwind connection. They didn't just fall in love with each other, they fell in love with a shared vision of a life filled with music, rescued animals, and the simple joy of a home-cooked meal. For years, they were the ultimate power couple, blending their talents to create a massive brand built on the idea of warmth and hospitality. They weren't just selling recipes, they were selling the idea of a perfect, happy home where the laughter never ended and the table was always full. However, as the Rachael Ray empire grew into a multi-million-dollar machine, the weight of that success began to press down on their private lives. The vibrant world the public saw was becoming harder and harder to maintain behind the scenes. Rachael was a whirlwind of productivity, filming shows, writing books, and launching product lines, while John balanced his own musical career and legal work for their businesses. Their schedules, once perfectly aligned, began to pull them in opposite directions. The quiet mornings they used to spend together over coffee were replaced by early morning call times and late-night business meetings. The good life they had worked so hard to build was suddenly demanding every second of their energy, leaving very little room for the simple, quiet connection that had started it all. Beneath the surface of their public happiness, the first signs of stress began to emerge. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, steady erosion of their private sanctuary. Rachael, known for her fierce loyalty, fought hard to keep the cracks from showing. She treated her home like a fortress, a place where the cameras couldn't reach and where she could finally take off the celebrity mask. She wanted to protect John and their life together from the prying eyes of a world that was always looking for a reason to judge. She became the gatekeeper of their happiness, working overtime to ensure that the public only saw the smiles and the success. But even the strongest fortress can't protect you from the internal pressure of a life lived at 100 miles per hour. The romance that had once felt so effortless was now requiring a level of maintenance they hadn't expected. They were two people trying to hold on to a dream while the world around them kept moving faster and faster. But as the world watched them smile on the red carpet and cheer for their success, a sudden and devastating accident at home threatened to burn their perfect world to the ground, leaving them to wonder if anything could ever be the same again. The night was supposed to be a quiet one at their beautiful home in Lake Luzerne, New York. But in an instant, the peace was shattered by the roar of flames. A fire, sparked in the chimney, quickly tore through the house that Rachael and John had spent 15 years turning into a sanctuary. As they stood on the lawn in the middle of the night, watching decades of memories, art, and personal treasures turn into black ash, the world they knew vanished. This wasn't just a house burning down, it was the physical representation of their shared history disappearing into the night sky. For a couple that built their entire brand on the concept of home, losing their own was a psychological blow that hit deeper than any financial loss ever could. They were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and each other. In the aftermath, the couple moved into a small, cramped guest house on the property. This sudden change in environment created a pressure cooker for their relationship. In their large mansion, they could have easily found separate corners to decompress after a long day of work. Now, the physical closeness was unavoidable. They were forced to look at one another without the distractions of a sprawling estate or a busy social calendar. This forced intimacy began to reveal the emotional distance that had been growing between them for years. As they sat among the few items they managed to save, the silence between them felt heavier than the smoke that still hung in the air. Rachael, the ultimate fixer, found herself in a situation she couldn't simply cook her way out of. She was grieving for her home, but she was also beginning to realize that the foundation of her marriage was being tested in ways she never expected. The stress of the fire was only the beginning. Rumors began to swirl about John's health, and the toll of being a primary caregiver started to show on Rachael's face. For a high-achieving woman who was used to being the engine that drove everyone else's success, the shift to a supportive, quiet role was draining. She was trying to manage a global brand while also navigating the complexities of a partner who was facing his own internal battles. The atmosphere in their small temporary home became thick with the scent of old ash and the sobering realization that their old life, the one where everything felt easy and certain, was gone forever. They were rebuilding a house, but they were also trying to figure out if they could rebuild the bond that had been scorched by years of public pressure and private pain. The emotional stakes had never been higher, and the cracks they had tried so hard to hide were becoming impossible to ignore. Just as the hammers and nails began to signal a new start and they started to rebuild the physical walls of their home, a shocking video of Rachael during a cooking segment surfaced. It left fans across the world terrified, wondering if the fire had claimed much more than just her house. The world of social media is rarely kind, especially when a beloved figure appears to stumble. It started with a single video clip from a cooking segment, a few minutes of footage that should have been just another day at work for Rachael Ray. But as the video spread across the internet, the reaction was immediate and intense. Fans pointed out her slurred speech, her seemingly unsteady hands, and a look in her eyes that many described as lost. Within hours, the comments sections were flooded with theories. Some whispered about a secret health crisis, while others cruelly speculated about substance abuse or the crushing weight of her recent losses. For a woman who had spent decades being the personification of having it all together, this public unraveling was a nightmare. The kitchen, once her place of ultimate power and comfort, had become the stage for a viral mystery that threatened to redefine her entire legacy. Behind the scenes, the reality was far more complex than a 30-second clip could ever show. This wasn't just about a bad day at the office, it was the visible manifestation of a woman who had reached her absolute limit. For years, Rachael had played the role of the fixer. She fixed the meals, she fixed the businesses, and most importantly, she tried to fix the private struggles within her marriage. The psychological weight of being a global icon while privately navigating John's health challenges had finally taken its toll. While the world saw a celebrity who looked off, those close to her saw a woman who was running on empty, carrying the burden of a secret life that was becoming too heavy to bear. She was navigating the grief of her lost home, the pressure of a shifting career, and the exhausting role of being the primary emotional support for her husband. In response to the growing noise, Rachael and John retreated even further into their private world. They adopted an us against the world mentality, a defensive crouch that many couples use when they feel under siege. They stopped listening to the outside world, focusing instead on surviving the day-to-day reality of their new life. But within that fortress of two, Rachael began to experience a profound sense of loneliness. It is a specific kind of isolation that happens when you are the strongest person in the room, when everyone relies on you, but there is no one for you to lean on. She was protecting John, protecting the brand, and protecting their history, but in the process, she was losing herself. The 30-minute meal girl was gone, replaced by a woman who was staring into the flames of her own life, wondering if she had the strength to put them out. As the speculation reached a fever pitch, one question haunted every headline: was Rachael's shaky performance a sign of a hidden medical emergency, or was it the visible cracking of a marriage that had finally reached its ultimate snapping point? For years, John Cusimano was the steady, rhythmic bass line to Rachael's high-energy melody. In every public appearance, he was the supportive husband, the rock that stood behind the queen of comfort. But as the years rolled on, the reality of aging in the relentless spotlight began to take its toll. This chapter peels back the glossy layers of celebrity to reveal a man facing his own quiet, internal battles. It wasn't just the stress of the fire or the loss of their home, it was a series of health scares that forced the couple to stop running and face a frightening new reality. For a man who had always been active and vibrant, the limitations of his own body became a psychological weight that he struggled to carry. The good life they had sold to the world was being replaced by doctor's appointments and long periods of recovery, turning their private world into a recovery ward. Rachael found herself in a role she never auditioned for, the full-time emotional anchor for a man who was drifting. The emotional labor required to keep John's spirits up was staggering. While her own world was under fire, literally and professionally, she poured every ounce of her remaining energy into John. She became his cheerleader, his protector, and his nurse, all while trying to maintain the facade of the cheerful TV host the world expected to see. This is the raw, unpolished side of a long-term partnership that the magazine covers never show. It is the ugly side of love, the part where you are tired, frustrated, and scared, but you stay because the history you've built is worth more than the peace you would find by leaving. Rachael's commitment was absolute, but it came at a high cost to her own mental and physical well-being. The dynamic between them shifted from a partnership of equals to a cycle of caregiving and dependence. As John retreated into himself to deal with his challenges, Rachael became the bridge between him and the rest of the world. She shielded him from the rumors and the prying eyes of the media, often taking the heat for their shared isolation. The grit of a real-life partnership isn't found in the grand gestures or the red carpet walks, it is found in the quiet, exhausting hours of a Tuesday afternoon when you are both at your worst. Rachael was fighting a war on two fronts, one against the public narrative that was tearing her apart, and one against the darkness that threatened to swallow her husband. She was a woman who had spent her life feeding others, but now, she was the one who was starving for a sign that things would get better. But a new revelation about a surprising choice John made during their long months of isolation suggests that Rachael wasn't the only one fighting a lonely battle to keep their marriage alive, and his decision would change everything. The smoke has finally settled, and for Rachael and John, the air is beginning to clear. After 20 years of marriage and a series of life-altering tragedies that would have broken most couples, they are entering a new chapter. This transition isn't about going back to the way things were before the fire or before the health scares. Instead, it is about moving forward into a much quieter reality. They are redefining what happiness looks like when the cameras are off and the empire isn't the main focus of their lives. For a woman who spent decades making sure everyone else was fed and happy, Rachael is finally learning to take care of herself. She has discovered that true strength isn't about hiding behind a cheerful brand or a perfect smile, it is about the courage to be vulnerable. Today, their life looks very different than it did during the high-speed years of daytime television dominance. They split their time between a rebuilt home in New York and a peaceful retreat in Italy, where the pace of life is dictated by the sun rather than a production schedule. In the rolling hills of the Italian countryside, they have found a sanctuary where they can focus on health, healing, and each other. Rachael has begun to speak her truth more openly, shedding the heavy armor of the perky TV host to reveal a woman who has walked through fire and survived. This new menu for their future emphasizes simplicity over excess. They have traded red carpets for long walks and crowded parties for intimate dinners where the only goal is connection. Their survival is a testament to a redesigned love, a partnership that accounts for their scars rather than trying to hide them. They didn't choose to stay together out of a sense of obligation or to save their public image. They stayed because they realized that the person who saw them at their absolute worst was the only one they wanted by their side at their best. It is a raw, honest kind of devotion that can only be forged in the middle of a crisis. Rachael and John have learned that a marriage isn't a finished recipe, it's something you have to adjust and season as the years go by. They have embraced the quiet, finding beauty in the stillness that once terrified them. But even as they heal, the world continues to watch, and the echoes of their most difficult years still linger in the background of every new project. Even as they find a fragile peace in the sunlight of Italy, one haunting question remains: can the Queen of Comfort ever truly escape the long, dark shadows of the past 3 years, or is the damage already done? For decades, Rachael Ray was a household name because of her speed, her efficiency, and her relentless optimism. But as she moved through her 50s, the world began to see a different side of the woman who had taught them how to cook. This chapter reflects on the profound psychological shift Rachael experienced as she transitioned from a celebrity to a human being with real, visible flaws. In a culture that often demands women in the spotlight remain ageless and perfect, Rachael's willingness to show her unpolished side was a radical act. By appearing on screen with shaky hands or tired eyes, she inadvertently created a deeper, more visceral connection with an audience that was also grappling with the realities of loss, aging, and the exhaustion of caregiving. She stopped being an untouchable icon and became a mirror for the millions of people who were also struggling to keep their own heads above water. This transformation wasn't easy. As she navigated her darkest hours, a divided response emerged from the public. On one side was a massive support system of fans who saw their own struggles reflected in her eyes. They sent messages of love and shared their own stories of house fires, sick partners, and the heavy weight of grief. On the other side were the critics, the voices in the digital noise who picked apart her appearance and questioned her mental state. Rachael had to learn the hard way how to navigate this storm of opinions. She realized that when you are a public figure, the world tries to write your narrative for you. They want to label you as broken or past your prime. But Rachael chose a different path. She reclaimed her story by refusing to hide, proving that resilience isn't about never falling down, it's about being brave enough to let people see you get back up. This period of her life became a study in the power of authenticity. By letting the perky persona slip, she found a new kind of authority, one based on experience and survival rather than just catchy catchphrases. She began to prioritize the spare moments, those quiet, unscripted intervals between the big events, where the real work of living happens. She leaned into her identity as a woman who had seen the worst of life and decided to keep cooking anyway. This wasn't just about a career comeback, it was about a woman finally giving herself permission to be messy. As she moved through the ruins of her old life, she discovered that her legacy wouldn't just be about 30-minute meals, but about the 30 years of grit it took to keep a marriage and a soul intact under the glare of the sun. But even as she settles into this new role as a voice for the resilient, Rachael is already looking toward the horizon. As she prepares to launch her next major project, she has dropped a cryptic hint that suggests the biggest change in her life is still yet to come. The bright studio lights have been replaced by the soft, natural glow of a home kitchen. In this final moment, Rachael Ray sits across from the camera, not as a polished television host, but as a woman who has endured the unthinkable. The energy that once defined her has transformed into something deeper and more grounded, a quiet strength born from surviving the fire. As she speaks to her audience, she shares a final, heart-wrenching truth about the reality of her marriage to John. She admits that there were days when the love they shared felt like it was buried under too much ash to ever be found again. She reveals that the secret to their long-lasting bond wasn't a perfect recipe or a magical lifestyle, but a brutal, honest willingness to let their old life burn down so they could build something new from the wreckage. Looking back on the journey from the heights of global fame to the depths of personal loss, the narrative comes full circle. We see a couple that was once defined by their success now defined by their survival. Rachael's path has been one of extreme highs and devastating lows, from the excitement of a new romance and a booming empire to the literal loss of her home and the quiet struggle of a health crisis. Through it all, she has learned that the most important lessons aren't found in the moments when everything is going right, but in the silence that follows a catastrophe. She has found her voice not by shouting over the noise of the media, but by leaning into the quiet truths of her own heart. She is no longer just the girl who taught the world how to cook, she is a survivor who taught herself how to live again. The tone of this final revelation is one of cautious hope. It acknowledges that life is messy, unpredictable, and often unfair. It doesn't promise a happily ever after, in the traditional sense, but it offers something much more valuable, authenticity. Rachael and John are moving forward with their scars visible, choosing each other every day in a world that is constantly changing. As the documentary ends, we see Rachael in her element, perhaps preparing a simple meal, no longer rushed by a timer or a producer's cue. She has reclaimed her narrative, showing that even when your world is stripped down to the studs, you can still find a way to create something beautiful. The legacy she leaves behind is one of resilience, proving that while you can't control the fire, you can certainly choose what you build once the smoke finally clears. But even as the screen fades to black and a sense of closure settles over her story, one haunting question remains in the minds of those who watched it all unfold. After 20 years in the spotlight, if the cameras hadn't been there to record their every move, would Rachael and John have stayed together at all?